Greetings and welcome back to Courageous Motherhood. I am wanting to take you guys on a journey with me. Psalms has been just a comfort for me this week, and it's not really a book that I really delve into too much in terms of straight through. And so, as I was reading along, we all hear about David, and David is a man after God's own heart, and we hear about maybe David and Goliath and the five smooth stones. Maybe we hear about the stories of David and Bathsheba, but a lot of people don't know, or if you're not in Psalms, like how much he was a worshiper and just had this really forthright and raw relationship and way of communicating with God. And so as I'm listening to each of these chapters on my audio Bible, I'm realizing I'm like, oof, that sounds, intense, and nah, I feel you, man. Like, that's deep. And how he's just like asking questions and crying out and asking for mercy or asking for protection and all these things. And I got to chapter 78, and this chapter was so interesting to me because when we hear about, just as a sidebar, when we hear about people in the Bible, it seems like they're these faraway, mythic, make-believe people. But when you really start to dig into it and you start to see the patterns and learn about the different groups of people, the different families, and really just some of the stuff that happened, you're just like, I have an auntie like that, or oh, I'm like that, or I could definitely see these things happening in community or different communities. Like, they're not that different from us, and they didn't face these like weird or oddly different circumstances than we face. They're actually very similar approaches, very similar attitudes, very similar emotions that we even modern day feel. And so that has been something that's been different probably in the last couple of years or so. Like, as I've been reading, different aspects of the text has highlighted itself. And so more so in the last couple of years, it's been, what are the commonalities to like who we are now? What are the challenges? What are the emotions and the feelings that they were expressing? And as you live life and you start to feel and go through different things, you're like, oof, yeah, that is totally relatable. But in this particular chapter, 78, it's really just talking about the rebelliousness of the Israelite people. And I am always just in awe at how many times, like, God can do all these miracles in our lives. God can show us all of these ways and breakthroughs, right? He can show us mercy, grace, give us these breakthroughs. We can experience all of these miracles, and somehow we always find ways to forget. Sometimes we still choose rebellion and denial and comfort. We still find reasons to complain. We still find areas to have unbelief, right? And it's something that we all experience. We're human. But in this particular chapter, it's really just going over how God has provided for Israel food, specific food. They complained, okay, well, we need manna. So then he drops bread from the sky. You got your manna. Like, okay, well, we want some meat. And then the meat is falling from the sky. And it's just like, isn't that like us? Like, it's always like, well, I want this, and oh, you didn't give me that. And it's like, even when God gives it to us, it's like we're constantly testing. And then when we do have it, we're so comfortable that we are just ungrateful and back into our rebellion. But in this particular chapter, what caught me was not only was God listing all of the ways that he had provided, and then all of the ways that people were consistently testing him, but then pretty much God was just like, you know what, you're done, and gave the people everything that they asked for. And while they're feasting on it, he's just like unleashing wrath. Like, okay, you want to complain, you want to be ungrateful, you want to be rebellious, here's your meat, here's your bread, here's all the things that you ask for, and here's my wrath with the side of wrath. And in verse 21, it says, therefore, well, no, let's go back a little bit. Verse 17, it says, yet they sinned still more against him. This is after they've gotten everything that they've asked for, rebelling against the Most High in the desert. They tested God in their heart by demanding the food that they craved. They spoke against God, saying, can God spread a table in the wilderness? He struck rocks so that water gushed out and streams overflowed. Can he also give bread or provide meat for his people? And then in verse 21, it says, therefore, when the Lord heard, he was full of wrath. A fire was kindled against Jacob. His anger rose against Israel. And this is kind of like the lineage of the people that are complaining. Because they did not believe in God and did not trust his saving power. Yet he commanded the skies above and opened the doors of heaven, and he rained down on them manna to eat and gave them the grain of heaven. Man ate of the bread of angels, and he sent them food in abundance. And then, 26, he caused the east wind to blow in the heavens, and by his power he led out the south wind. He rained meat on them like dust, winged birds like the sand of the seas. I'm not going to read the whole thing. I'm going to skip down a little bit to 30. Verse 30, it says, but before they had satisfied their craving, while the food was still in their mouths, the anger of God rose against them, and he killed the strongest of them and laid low the young men of Israel. In spite of all this, they still sinned. Despite his wonders, they did not believe. So he made their days vanish like a breath, and their years in terror. And that really struck me, because so often when we think about religion, spirituality, our relationship with God, we think about God healing us, God restoring us, God redeeming us from our sin, from our past lives. And then you kind of get into this phase of, being comfortable, like, oh, that's my Abba, that's my Father, like God wants these good things for me. And maybe you begin to ask God for particular things because you feel like if I only had this one thing in my life, then it would be great. Or, Lord, I really would like this. I would like to have this. And so in this case, the Israelites have been saved from slavery. And on their way out in the desert, on their way to the promised land, they are literally complaining like they weren't just enslaved for hundreds of years. And I was thinking about in modern context and just even within myself and all of us in this culture, where we are constantly testing God. And even when God in his mercy and in his grace gives us the things that we're asking for, sometimes when our heart is not right and our heart is not with God, he is just like, you know what? You asked me for all of this stuff, but you still don't believe. You're still testing me. You're still sinning. So I am going to give you the thing that you are asking for. And before you actually have a chance to enjoy it, I'm about to unleash this wrath. I'm about to kill your young, kill your strong, and make you literally live in terror for the rest of the lives that you have left. And it's like, guys, this is not necessary. We don't have to have that experience. But it's like, it's a heart issue. In our heart, so many times we get distracted from being grateful and wanting to please God because we know that living a righteous life is not just good for us, but it's good for our communities. It's good for the earth. It is just a part of the way that the kingdom needs to operate. But it takes a continuous cleansing, a cleansing of perspective, a cleansing of our heart, a cleansing of our mind and our spirit. And so as this was playing today, I was like, no, let me just play it back. And I just kept listening to the details and I kept listening to the cycles. And I was just like, my goodness, God gives us so many chances. But in this case, I'm like, if I ask for meat, or if I were delivered from slavery, like, Lord, would I just be in the wilderness just complaining? And if you dropped everything from the sky and you provided water for us, like, are we that deprived that we wouldn't be grateful? And the answer is yes, because it happens even in our modern day context. And it was just so humbling, because it was like, Lord, I don't want to be the one that is just asking for things, but I am testing you. I'm testing you to just get what I want, or I'm testing you because I am internally discontent in my heart with you, which is essentially saying like, Lord, you're not enough. I want some meat. I want some bread. I'm tired. I'm hungry. And this like complaining spirit, because, in this current culture, we are sold this version of Christianity or Christ or God or religion that is just like, well, why would Jesus allow bad things to happen? Why would God allow bad things to happen? Da 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 da. And I'm like, I don't know what Bible y'all are reading, but time after time after time, like, God will really get with somebody, whether it was his own children, whether it was the enemies of his children, whether it was an individual that was in direct disobedience. And then there is also love and grace and mercy and miracles, but there's an end to the dissatisfaction and the complaint and the disrespect of God's provision as it stands. There is an end of the rope to that discontentment, to that disobedience. And then God comes in and he corrects. And most often, I mean, who wants to get corrected like that? Who wants to see all of your strongest sons, which I would imagine is like, I don't know, your 20 to 30-year-olds, the ones that you would consider to protect you guys, all of them just get wiped out, dead. That's a legacy ruined. And then you have a whole host of people that survive that, who are then just living in terror. And it's just like, but why? And so I just wanted to share, and maybe even let's talk about that. Like, what are some ways that we can really look at the word as an example of how we can be mindful in our hearts and in our actions and even in our thoughts towards God, and just be constantly repentant of the ways that we are approaching God or dealing with God or even dealing with God's people, because there's an end to that. And in this day and age, it's like you can just feel the sensitivity in the air. There's so much going on. There's so much spiritual activity, spiritual warfare happening. And it's just like, Lord, I don't want to be the murmurer. I don't want to be the complainer. I don't want to be the one that is testing you and just asking for things that I desire for my comfort, instead of wanting to live my life out in obedience. And so I just wanted to share that with you guys today, because I just was like, man, these Israelites were so irky sometimes. I'm like, guys. But then I look back over my life and I look at just that rebellious nature that I had as a young person, and I'm like, man, that is also equally as irky. And just being prayerful, like, Lord, like, continue to wring that out of my heart, because I don't want to be the one that just has, my youth wiped out. I don't want to be the one that has to live my years in terror or, remorse because of this like constant position of disobedience. And so I want to encourage you, because it's not easy, but it's like we need a posture of surrender. We need a posture of belief. We need a posture of obedience, especially in this season. And so I just want to encourage you. We are all on this walk, but when we're in this book, y'all, like, there's so much stuff in here, and it's so practical, and it's so, applicable to our daily lives. But today, it was just like 78 was like one of the longer Psalms. And I was like, man, they just really could not get it together. Like, they were really adamant about their disobedience. And, it's just so tremendous, because God is just like, and then his anger is stirred up. And I've read that a couple of times in the Bible, but I'm like, man, like, what is God's bandwidth? This is the, love is patient, love is kind, da, 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 da. Like, how far do we have to go to actually be stirring up, anger in God? And then it also comes back and it says, down in verse 41, they tested God again and again and provoked the Holy One of Israel. They did not remember his power or the day when he redeemed them from the foe, when he performed his signs in Egypt. And, I was on the way home and I saw a rainbow. And it's just one of those symbols in my life, and that God in the Bible gave to Noah, that was to represent a promise that says, I will not flood the earth again. And so in general, what it represents to me is like God is going to keep his promises. But it's like in this chapter, it's like they just saw all of these miracles. They just saw these epic battles of the Egyptian magicians and shamans going act for act, turning water into blood, frogs, flies, locusts, and turning the staff into a snake, and then Moses' staff eating the magician's staff that had turned into a snake. Like all of these plagues in this battle between Moses coming to free the people from Pharaoh, they're witnessing. They are literally enslaved in Egypt when all of this is happening. And then you get to the point where God is like, okay, that's cool. So now I'm just going to kill the firstborn of everyone in everyone's home. So if you don't have that blood over your doorpost, your firstborn is dead. And that's not something that the magicians were able to duplicate. But I'm like, man, do we have to get to like having our firstborns killed and having to put blood over our door? Because I think it was said that even some Egyptians were like, yeah, Pharaoh, you doing the most. I'm gonna go ahead and put blood over my door like these Hebrews because nah, you're tripping. And so it's like, but every time God is like, okay, well, I'm displaying my power. I'm showing you these exercises in power and grace and mercy, and you're still taking it for granted. And so every time he gets pushed to that point, it's like we can't wonder and go, man,